The gates of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp swung open on April 15, 1945, in northern Germany, and what the British soldiers found inside made grown men fall to their knees and weep. 60,000 prisoners lay dying in wooden barracks that reeked of death and human waste. 13,000 corpses were piled in heaps around the camp, bodies stacked like firewood, their skeletal arms reaching toward a sky they would never see again. The smell hit you from half a mile away, a thick wall of rot and sickness that clung to your uniform and stayed in your throat for days. The camp was free, but freedom meant nothing to people too weak to stand. Every day, 500 more prisoners died, even though the Nazis were gone. Typhus spread through the barracks like wildfire through dry grass. The British doctors worked around the clock, but there were too many sick and too few medicines. Survivors who had dreamed of liberation for years now died within sight of their rescuers. One British medic wrote in his diary that night, "We won the battle, but we're losing the war against death itself." 9 days after liberation, on April 24th, British intelligence officers burst into the command tent with urgent news. General Herbert Morrison looked up from his maps, his face gray with exhaustion. The intelligence officer was breathing hard, like he had been running. "Sir, we've intercepted German communications, 6 satellite camps in a 30-kilometer radius, 36,000 Jewish prisoners, still under Nazi control. German High Command issued execution orders this morning. All prisoners are to be liquidated tonight before we can reach them." Morrison felt his stomach drop. "Tonight? Are you certain?" "Yes, sir. The decoded message was clear. They're calling it Operation Final Sweep. Every prisoner dead by sunrise to prevent them from falling into our hands as witnesses." Morrison stared at the map. The nearest satellite camp was 12 kilometers away through German-held territory. His front-line units were engaged with 3 Wehrmacht divisions. A conventional military push would take days, maybe a week. By then, 36,000 people would be corpses in mass graves. An American liaison officer shook his head. "General, we can't reach them in time. This is tactically impossible. We need to focus on the main advance into Germany." In the back of the tent, Major Samuel Levesque had been listening in silence. He was 34 years old. A French-Canadian from Montreal who spoke with an accent that made the British officers smile. Before the war, Sam had been a logistics manager at Canadian Pacific Railway, organizing train schedules and supply routes across a continent. The Army had made him a major and given him command of a transport battalion, which was a fancy name for truck drivers. The British officers called his unit the Teamsters, and not in a kind way. To them, Sam was just a truck driver in a uniform, but Sam was studying the intelligence photos spread across the table. He noticed something the generals had missed. German supply convoys were still moving freely at night, even through the chaos of their collapsing army. Trucks painted with red crosses drove between checkpoints without being stopped, carrying medical supplies to Wehrmacht units. The Nazis still respected the Red Cross markings because they clung to the fiction that they were following the rules of war, even as they planned mass murder. "Sir," Sam said quietly, "I have a solution." Morrison barely glanced at him. "Major Levesque, we don't have time for... We use their own system against them." Sam stepped forward and placed a sketch on the table. "We have 73 captured German trucks in the depot. We paint red crosses on them. We load them with 300 Canadian soldiers who speak French and German. We split into multiple convoys and hit all 6 camps simultaneously tonight, pretending to be Red Cross volunteers evacuating typhus patients." The tent went silent. Morrison stared at Sam like he had suggested flying to the moon. "That's fraud, Major. Those aren't real Red Cross vehicles. If the Germans discover the deception, they'll execute every prisoner and every man in your unit." "Yes, sir," Sam said calmly. "But if we do nothing, those 36,000 people die anyway. This way, they have a chance. We have 11 hours of darkness. 73 trucks can carry roughly 38,000 people if we pack them tight. The math works." An American colonel laughed bitterly. "The math works. Major, this isn't a railway schedule. This is enemy territory with German divisions between you and those camps." Sam met his eyes without flinching. "I spent 15 years moving freight across Canada on impossible schedules. I know how to coordinate multiple convoys, calculate loading times, and plan efficient routes. What I'm proposing is fundamentally a logistics problem, not a military one." Morrison stood up, his face flushed with anger. "I could have you court-martialed for even suggesting this. You're talking about violating the Geneva Conventions." "Yes, sir. You could court-martial me." Sam's voice stayed level. "But while you're preparing the paperwork, those people will be dead. So the question isn't whether my plan is legal. The question is whether you can live with yourself knowing you had one chance to save 36,000 lives, and you chose not to take it." The general stared at Sam for a long moment. Then he looked at the map, at the 6 red circles marking the satellite camps, at the decoded German message ordering their liquidation. Finally, he spoke without looking at Sam. "I have a meeting in Brussels that will keep me away from camp until tomorrow morning. I won't return until 8 a.m. Whatever happens while I'm gone, I won't know about it until I return. Do you understand me, Major?" Sam allowed himself a small smile. "Yes, sir. I understand perfectly. Then get out of my tent before I change my mind." Sam found Private Saul Goldberg near the medical tents. Saul was a Jewish kid from Hamilton, 23 years old, who spoke Yiddish and German as well as English. His parents had escaped Poland in 1938, and now Saul wore a Canadian uniform and tried not to think too hard about what had happened to the relatives who stayed behind. "Saul, I need every French-speaking and German-speaking soldier you can find in the next 2 hours. No questions, no explanations. Just tell them we're saving lives tonight, and they might not come back." Saul looked at his commander's face and understood immediately. "How many do you need, sir?" 300. "And Saul?" "We leave at sundown." By 6 p.m., Sam had his 312 volunteers. Most were French-Canadian boys from Montreal and Quebec City, who could pass for Belgian volunteers if they kept their mouths mostly shut. Others were Jewish soldiers like Saul Goldberg, men who had personal reasons for wanting to save every Jewish life they could. Sam didn't ask for speeches or explanations. He just wrote down names and assigned convoy positions. The 73 trucks sat in rows at the depot, captured German vehicles that still smelled of diesel and Wehrmacht cigarettes. Sam organized his men into 6 separate convoys, each targeting a specific satellite camp. Convoy Alpha would take 12 trucks to Bomlitz, Convoy Bravo, 15 trucks to Unterlüss, Convoy Charlie, 13 trucks to Hamburen, Convoy Delta, 16 trucks to Ahlem, Convoy Echo, 9 trucks to Stucken, Convoy Foxtrot, 8 trucks to Salzgitter. They painted red crosses on the canvas sides, using whitewash and red paint stolen from field hospitals. In the darkness, they looked real enough. Sam had calculated every detail from his railway days. Each truck could carry 85 to 90 people standing, packed like sardines. Loading time 3 minutes per truck. Travel time to camps ranging from 40 minutes to 2 hours. If everything went perfectly, they could evacuate all 6 camps and return before sunrise. Sam knew from experience that nothing ever went perfectly. At 7:15 p.m., a British lieutenant appeared at the depot. Sam tensed, expecting orders to shut down the operation. Instead, the lieutenant handed him a folder. "Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood asked me to deliver this. He said to tell you he's asleep and didn't see anything." Inside were German checkpoint locations, radio frequencies, and detailed maps showing which roads were least guarded after dark. There was also a set of forged documents with official-looking stamps. Blackwood had been in British intelligence for 3 years and knew exactly what papers would fool a tired German guard at midnight. Sam distributed the documents to his convoy leaders. "Remember, you're Belgian Red Cross volunteers evacuating typhus patients to quarantine facilities. If anyone asks questions, mention typhus 3 times. Nobody wants to catch typhus when the war's almost over. Saul, you're with me in Convoy Alpha. Jacques, you lead Convoy Bravo." At 7:45 p.m., as the sun disappeared behind the trees, 73 trucks rolled out of the depot in 6 different directions. The largest coordinated rescue operation of the war had begun, and German High Command had no idea it was happening. Sam led Convoy Alpha northeast toward Bomlitz. The night was cold and clear, stars bright overhead like holes punched in black cloth. His truck rattled over rough roads, headlights dimmed to avoid drawing attention. Behind him came 11 more trucks, each one carrying 4 Canadian soldiers and empty space that would soon be filled with rescued prisoners. At 9 p.m., they hit their first checkpoint. A Wehrmacht corporal stepped into the road, rifle raised. Sol leaned out the window and spoke in German with his Yiddish accent. "Red Cross Medical Convoy. We're evacuating typhus patients from the transit camp at Bomlitz to prevent the disease from spreading to your units." The corporal looked at their papers by flashlight. He was young, maybe 19, with hands that shook slightly. "I didn't receive notification of any Red Cross convoy. The authorization came through Brussels this afternoon," Sol said smoothly. "Check with your headquarters if you wish, but every minute we delay increases the risk of typhus spreading. The disease is very contagious." The word typhus worked like magic. The corporal stepped back and waved them through without another question. They reached Bomlitz at 10:20 p.m. The SS guards had already fled, leaving only a handful of Wehrmacht soldiers who seemed relieved to see anyone who might take responsibility for the 840 skeletal prisoners locked in wooden barracks. Sam's men moved with practiced efficiency, loading people as gently as they could. Most were too weak to climb into the trucks and had to be lifted bodily. A woman grabbed Sam's arm as he helped her up. She was maybe 30, but looked 60, her face a skull wrapped in gray skin. "Where are you taking us?" she whispered in Yiddish. "Canada," Sam said. "You're safe now." She started crying and couldn't stop. Meanwhile, Convoy Bravo hit a problem at Checkpoint 7. A German sergeant was smarter than the others, a veteran who had been fighting since 1939 and didn't trust easy answers. He studied their forged papers and frowned. "These stamps are wrong. The district office that issued these was evacuated 3 weeks ago." Jacques Fortier kept his voice calm, speaking French. "We received them in Brussels. Perhaps the Brussels office was using old stamps. Shall I radio Brussels to verify? Though that may take several hours and these typhus patients need immediate quarantine." The sergeant hesitated. Behind him, his men were nervous. Everyone knew the war was almost over. Nobody wanted to die in the last weeks over a paperwork dispute about sick prisoners. "Go," the sergeant finally said. "But if I find out you're lying, there will be consequences." "Of course," Jacques said, and drove away before the sergeant could change his mind. By 11 p.m., all 6 convoys had reached their target camps. The coordinated operation was working exactly as Sam had planned. At Hamburen, Convoy Charlie found their barracks and began loading. At Alem, Convoy Delta discovered the camp was larger than intelligence had estimated. At Stücken, Convoy Echo worked quickly to evacuate everyone they could find. At Salzgitter, Convoy Foxtrot faced the biggest challenge. The camp held far more prisoners than anyone had expected. But in a communications bunker 15 kilometers away, a German signals officer was listening to radio chatter and growing suspicious. Multiple reports of Red Cross convoys moving through the sector, multiple requests for checkpoint clearances, all within the same 3-hour window. He picked up his telephone and called German High Command in Berlin. "Sir, I'm reporting unusual activity in the Bergen-Belsen sector. Multiple large convoys claiming Red Cross authorization, all moving tonight. Given the liquidation orders issued this morning, I thought you should know." In Berlin, General Wilhelm Schörner, one of Hitler's most fanatical commanders, felt cold fury wash over him. Someone was interfering with Operation Final Sweep. Someone was trying to save the prisoners they had ordered executed. "Send immediate orders to all checkpoints," Schörner barked. "Stop and detain all Red Cross vehicles. Inspect every truck. If they're carrying prisoners, execute everyone on sight. And dispatch the 23rd SS Battalion to intercept those convoys. I want this stopped within the hour." The race against time had just become a race against death itself. Convoy Alpha was on its way back to British lines, 12 trucks packed with 840 rescued prisoners, when Sam's radio crackled to life. It was Blackwood's voice, urgent and clipped. All convoy leaders, this is Raven. German High Command has discovered your operation. They've issued shoot-on-sight orders for all Red Cross vehicles. SS Battalion dispatched to intercept. You have approximately 40 minutes before they reach the main road junctions. Get your people out now. Sam's heart hammered in his chest. 40 minutes. They were still 18 kilometers from safety, with trucks that couldn't go faster than 40 kilometers per hour on these damaged roads. The math was brutally simple. They wouldn't make it. He grabbed his radio. All convoys, this is Alpha Leader. German High Command knows. They're sending SS troops to cut us off. We need to move fast, but we can't leave anyone behind. Convoy leaders, report your status. One by one, the responses came in. Convoy Bravo was loaded and moving with nearly 2,000 prisoners. Convoy Charlie was nearly done loading over 1,000 people at Hamburen and would be moving shortly. Convoy Delta was still loading at Alam, where they had discovered far more prisoners than expected. Over 4,000 and counting. Convoy Echo was done, and rolling with 2,000 aboard. Convoy Foxtrot at Salzgitter had the biggest problem. They had found a massive camp with over 25,000 prisoners. Their trucks were overloaded, and they were the farthest from safety. Sam made a decision. Convoys Alpha, Bravo, and Echo, push for British lines at maximum speed. Your people are already loaded. Convoys Charlie, Delta, and Foxtrot, finish loading everyone and follow. Use the back roads Blackwood marked in yellow. They're longer but less guarded. Sir, Jacques' voice came through from Convoy Bravo. If the SS catches the slower convoys, everyone dies. Then we make sure they don't catch them, Sam said. Alpha and Bravo, once we reach British lines, we're coming back with every armed soldier we can find. We'll meet the slower convoys halfway and provide cover. Move now, people. 38 minutes until the SS reaches the main junctions. Sam's convoy pushed hard, engines screaming, trucks bouncing over rough roads. In the back, rescued prisoners held on to each other to avoid being thrown against the wooden sides. They didn't complain. They understood that noise meant movement and movement meant escape. At a major crossroads checkpoint, everything went wrong. The checkpoint had been reinforced with SS troops who had received the new orders from Berlin. Convoy Charlie arrived with 13 trucks full of prisoners just as the SS battalion commander was reading his instructions to detain and execute everyone in Red Cross vehicles. The SS major stepped into the road, 20 soldiers behind him with weapons raised. Stop! All vehicles stop immediately. The convoy leader, Corporal Michel Dubois, was driving the lead truck. He stopped, his mind racing. Behind him in the 13-truck convoy, over 1,000 Jewish prisoners waited in the trucks, silent as death. If the SS searched the vehicles, everyone would be executed on the spot. He stepped out of the cab, his hands visible, and spoke in his best Parisian French. Good evening, Major. We're Belgian Red Cross volunteers evacuating. I don't care what you claim to be, the Major interrupted in German. I have orders from General Schörner himself. All Red Cross vehicles are to be searched. If you're carrying prisoners marked for liquidation, you and everyone with you will be shot. Dubois felt sweat running down his back despite the cold night air. The SS soldiers were spreading out, surrounding the convoy. There was no escape. Over 1,000 people were about to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then he heard engines behind him. Big engines, heavy engines. He turned and saw 6 British tanks rolling up the road, their guns trained on the SS checkpoint. Behind the tanks came 2 trucks full of armed Canadian soldiers. Sam had made it to British lines and come back with reinforcements, faster than should have been possible. Sam jumped out of the lead tank. A borrowed British officer's uniform hastily pulled over his Canadian jacket. He spoke in perfect English with an aristocratic British accent he had learned from BBC radio. Major, I'm Captain Blackwood, British intelligence. These Red Cross vehicles are part of an authorized intelligence operation. You will stand down immediately. The SS major looked at the tanks, at the armed soldiers, at the forged British intelligence credentials Sam was holding up. He was outnumbered and outgunned. The war was almost over. Did he really want to die here tonight, fighting British tanks over a convoy of sick prisoners? This is irregular, the major said slowly. I have orders from Berlin. And I have orders from London that supersede your orders from Berlin, Sam said coldly. The war is over in 2 weeks, Major. Perhaps 3. Use your head. Stand aside or die here. Your choice. For 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Nobody moved. Then the SS major lowered his weapon. Pass through. But I'm reporting this to General Schörner. You do that, Sam said, and the convoy rolled forward. By 3 a.m., all 6 convoys had been accounted for. The last trucks from Convoy Foxtrot crossed into British lines at 3:42, their engines smoking from the hard run, their passengers crying and praying and holding each other. Sam stood at the checkpoint and counted every truck, every person. The final count came in at dawn. 36,000. 217 Jewish prisoners evacuated in one night. 840 from Bomlitz. 1,920 from Unterlüß. 1,215 from Hamburen. 4,308 from Ahlem. 2,112 from Stücken. And 25,822 from Salzgitter, which had been far larger than intelligence had estimated. Not one Canadian soldier lost. Not one prisoner left behind. 73 trucks had driven through German lines, loaded 36,000 people, and brought them to safety in 11 hours. Private Sol Goldberg sat on the running board of his truck as the sun rose, his hands shaking with exhaustion. He pulled out a small diary and wrote in Yiddish, "We saved them. All of them." When we told them they were going to Canada, they didn't believe us. Some collapsed when they realized it was true. We saved 36,000 bodies tonight. I don't know if we saved their souls. I don't know if any of us will ever be the same. In Berlin, General Schörner read the reports with cold fury. An entire SS battalion had been faced down by British tanks. 36,000 prisoners marked for liquidation had escaped. Someone had coordinated a massive rescue operation right under their noses, and they hadn't realized it until it was too late. He wrote in his daily report to Hitler, "The Canadians executed a coordinated deception operation that demonstrates sophisticated intelligence capabilities. They used our own Red Cross protocols against us and evacuated all satellite camp prisoners before Operation Final Sweep could be executed. This represents a significant intelligence failure and propaganda defeat. Recommend immediate investigation." But by then, it didn't matter. The war would be over in 13 days. The camps were empty. The prisoners were safe. And German high command had learned far too late that the Canadian soldiers they had dismissed as mere truck drivers had just pulled off one of the greatest rescues in military history. The war in Europe ended 2 weeks later on May 7th, 1945. Church bells rang across liberated cities, and soldiers danced in the streets and kissed strangers because the killing was finally over. But in the quiet offices where men made decisions about medals and official records, Major Sam Levesque's operation became a problem that nobody knew how to solve. The British government was furious when they learned the full details. Using Red Cross symbols for military deception violated the Geneva Conventions, the same international laws that were supposed to protect prisoners and civilians during war. It didn't matter that the deception had saved 36,000 lives. What mattered was that if the story became public, it could undermine the moral authority the Allies needed to prosecute Nazi war criminals at the trials that were being planned. Worse, the operation had created a diplomatic nightmare. General Schörner's report to Hitler had been captured by Allied intelligence when Berlin fell. The document proved that German high command had discovered the rescue operation and issued orders to stop it. This meant the Allies had engaged in active military deception using protected Red Cross symbols, something that could complicate war crimes prosecutions. A classified meeting was held in London in June 1945. Military lawyers argued for hours about what to do with Sam and his men. Some wanted courts-martial to prove that the Allies respected international law even when the Nazis didn't. Others argued that punishing men for saving lives would be a public relations disaster. Still others worried that the German High Command's documented response to the operation could be used as a defense by Nazi officers facing trial. In the end, they chose silence. The entire operation was classified top secret and buried in archives that wouldn't be opened for 50 years. Every soldier who participated was ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements threatening prison time if they spoke publicly about what they had done. The official record stated only that Canadian transport units had provided logistical support during the liberation of concentration camps in northern Germany. No mention of Red Cross trucks or nighttime convoys through enemy lines. No mention of 36,000 lives saved in one impossible night. No mention of German High Command's frantic attempts to stop an operation they discovered too late. Sam Levesque received no medal, no commendation, not even a letter of thanks. He returned to Montreal in August 1945 and went back to work for Canadian National Railway, organizing freight schedules and supply routes just like before the war. His wife asked him once what he did in Germany, and he told her he drove trucks. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. He never spoke about it again, but the story didn't die completely. It lived in whispers and private conversations, passed down through families like a secret inheritance. The 312 Canadian soldiers who participated told their children in bits and pieces, usually late at night when memories grew too heavy to carry alone. Private Saul Goldberg kept his diary hidden in a shoebox for 52 years before his family donated it to the Canadian War Museum in 1997. Slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom, the truth began to emerge. Military historians discovered something interesting when they finally studied the operation in the 1990s. What Sam had done in those desperate hours became a template for a new kind of military thinking. During the Korean War, Canadian forces became known for creative solutions to humanitarian crises, finding ways to evacuate civilians from combat zones using methods that bent or broke traditional military doctrine. In peacekeeping missions from Cyprus to Rwanda, Canadian soldiers earned a reputation for doing whatever it took to protect innocent people, even when the rulebook said they should stand aside. The operation had a name in classified military studies, the Bergen-Belsen overnight evacuation, and it was taught at staff colleges as an example of asymmetric logistics and mass coordination under pressure. Young officers learned that sometimes the most important military objective isn't killing the enemy, but saving the innocent, and that creative deception can achieve what brute force cannot. The case became required reading for anyone studying humanitarian operations in war zones. What made the operation particularly significant was that it had forced German High Command to react. General Schörner's report, discovered in captured Nazi archives, showed that the highest levels of German military leadership had scrambled to stop the rescue and failed. This wasn't a local operation that slipped under the radar. This was a strategic level success that demonstrated how unconventional thinking could outmaneuver even a fanatical enemy command structure. The transformation was slow but real. What had been an act of desperate insubordination in 1945 became standard doctrine by the 1970s. Canadian military planning now included specific protocols for mass civilian evacuation under fire, for coordinating multiple simultaneous operations, for using unconventional methods when conventional approaches would take too long. Sam's railway logistics, his 3-minute loading times, his careful route planning, his coordination of 6 separate convoys, became part of how modern armies think about saving lives in combat zones. Major Sam Levesque died quietly in Montreal in 1982 at the age of 71. His obituary in the local paper said he was a retired railway manager and decorated war veteran. It didn't say what he had really done. Only 17 people attended his funeral, mostly family and a few old railway colleagues. None of the 312 soldiers he led were there, because most of them didn't know he had died. The operation had scattered them across Canada after the war, and they had lost touch over the decades. But something remarkable happened in 1997. When Saul Goldberg's family donated his diary to the museum, a researcher named Dr. Sarah Chen began investigating the story. She tracked down surviving members of the operation, now old men in their 70s and 80s, and recorded their memories before it was too late. 67 of them had never told their families what they did in Germany. They had kept the secret for 52 years, carrying it alone because the government had ordered them to stay silent. One veteran, Michel Dubois, the young driver who had faced down the SS major at the Crossroads checkpoint, broke down crying during his interview. He was 75 years old and his hands shook with age. "We saved all those people in one night," he said, tears running down his weathered face, "and we were never allowed to talk about it. For 50 years I thought maybe I dreamed it, maybe it didn't really happen. But it did happen. We saved them. Even German high command couldn't stop us." The story finally became public in 2003 when Dr. Chen published her research, including the declassified German high command documents that proved the operation had forced a strategic-level response from Nazi leadership. By then, most of the participants were dead. Sam had been gone for 21 years. Saul Goldberg had passed away in 1995. Of the 312 soldiers who risked everything that night, only 43 were still alive to see their story told. The Canadian government issued a formal apology in 2005 for forcing the veterans to keep silent about an operation that deserved recognition, not suppression. The survivors received medals 60 years late, ribbons pinned to suits instead of uniforms, honors that meant something but could never give back the decades of enforced silence. The broader lesson took even longer to understand. What Sam and his men proved was that innovation in war doesn't always come from new weapons or better tactics. Sometimes it comes from people who think differently, because they come from different backgrounds. Sam wasn't a career soldier. He was a railway manager who understood logistics and timing, and how to coordinate complex operations efficiently. His civilian experience made him see solutions that traditional military officers missed, and perhaps the deepest lesson was about human nature itself. The German guards who let them pass, the officers who hesitated to act, even the SS major who stood down when faced with British tanks. They all made choices that night. Some chose to keep following orders even when the orders were evil. Others chose to step aside, even knowing they might be court-martialed for it. And at the very top, German high command discovered they were powerless to stop 312 determined men who refused to let 36,000 innocent people die. Today, in an era of refugee crises and humanitarian disasters from Syria to Ukraine to Sudan, the same questions arise. Do we wait for proper authorization and perfect conditions before acting? Do we follow international protocols even when following them means watching people die? Or do we sometimes need the courage to break the rules, to risk everything, to do what's right, even when what's right is also illegal? Major Sam Levesque and his 312 volunteers answered that question on one desperate night in April 1945. They didn't ask permission to save 36,000 lives. They asked forgiveness. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the most moral act is the most insubordinate one. The real challenge isn't deciding between right and wrong, but having the courage to accept the price of doing what's right. Rules exist for good reasons, to maintain order and prevent chaos and protect the innocent. But sometimes the rules themselves become the enemy, and following them becomes a kind of cowardice dressed up as duty. In the end, Sam Levesque's story teaches us that heroism isn't always loud or recognized or rewarded. Sometimes it's quiet men doing impossible things in the darkness, knowing they might be punished for it, doing it anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. And perhaps the greatest courage of all is carrying the weight of 36,000 saved lives in silence for 50 years, never receiving thanks, never seeking glory, but knowing in your heart that it was worth every consequence. Even when German high command itself tried to stop them and failed, these ordinary soldiers proved that determination and ingenuity can overcome even the most powerful evil if only we have the courage to try.